Hello students, this is Miss Dalton, and today's video is on solving quadratics by completing the square. Okay, in this video, again, we're going to be solving by completing the square. We've already talked about completing the square previously when you had to convert standard form into vertex form. This method is also used to solve quadratics and to find your x-intercepts. And the reason why we would do it is because then you can solve it using the square root. Okay, so I've written the steps out to the side here for completing the square in case you need a refresher. And I'm just going to work out this problem following along with those steps. Okay, so the first thing you'd want to do is make sure that the equation is in standard form. X squared minus 10x plus 1 is in standard form. So we're going to move the constant c to the other side. Okay, so I'm going to do that by doing x squared minus 10x, and then I will move this c to the other side by subtracting it. Now I'm going to leave a space here, and then I'll put my equal sign, and then -1. Again, that space is for adding in what I need to add in to make that perfect square trinomial. At this point, you'll factor out any leading coefficient, a, but our a is 1 in this example, so we don't need to factor that out. Then we're going to add the b over 2 squared to the other side, so let's figure out what that would be. So we're going to take that -10, we're going to divide it by 2, which gives us -5, and then we're going to square it. So -5 squared would be a positive 25, so we're going to add that to both sides. The only time it would be different that you're adding to a different number that you're adding to the other side is if you had to factor out an a ahead of time. Okay, at this point, you will rewrite your perfect square trinomial in factored form, so as a binomial squared. So that's going to be x, and then half of that middle term, so -5. Squared. And then let's go ahead and simplify the opposite side. So -1 plus 25 is 24. And so now at this point, because we have something squared, well then now we can solve it by taking the square root of both sides, which will undo the square. So we'll have x minus 5, and then you want to make sure that you remember to put plus or minus the square root of 24. And I would go ahead and simplify that radical too. We'll do that in this next step. So we're going to add 5 to the other side. So it'll be 5 plus or minus the square root of 24. Now I would simplify that radical. That radical can simplify to be 4 times 6, and we can take the square root of 4. So we will have 5 plus or minus, the square root of 4 is 2, so that's going to come to the outside, and then 6 would stay under. Okay, if you still don't understand how to simplify radicals, then at this point I would suggest you coming in to get some extra help with that. So this is your simplified radical, or simplified solution. Okay, example 2. So this time we have an a that is not 1. So we're still going to move the c to the other side. So we're going to have 2x squared plus 8x. Go ahead and leave a space. Equals. We'll bring that 14 to the other side by subtracting it. So we have a -14 on the right. Then we need to divide out our a. So we're going to divide out 2, and we'll be left with x squared plus 4x space, still equal to that -14 space. Okay, in that space, now's when you'd want to divide the middle term by 2. So 4 divided by 2 squared, so that would be 2 squared, which is 4, so that's going to go here. Okay, but to the other side, we need to multiply it times a. So 4 times 2 is 8, so on the other side we're going to add 8. Now go ahead and factor it as a perfect square trinomial. So we've got 2 parentheses x plus 2 squared. That's how that would factor. And then on the right we have negative 14 plus 8, which is a negative 6. This point we're trying to solve for x, so we'd want to divide both sides by 2. So we get x plus 2 squared equals negative 3. And then take the square root, cancels off the square, so we have x plus 2 equals, now remember when you have the square root of a negative, that's going to be I, and we are going to put the plus or minus out front, so plus or minus I square root 3. Then you would just want to subtract 2 to the other side, so you would end up with x equals negative 2 plus or minus I square root 3. Okay, example 3. So let's try another example, another one where a is not 1. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to move that c to the other side. So we're going to subtract 3. Then we have 4x squared plus 8x space equals negative 3 space. Go ahead and divide out your 4. So 4 parentheses x squared plus 2x space equals negative 3 space. Then we'd want to decide what the number is that we have to add in. So we're going to take that 2, we're going to divide it by 2, and then we're going to square it. So that would be 1. So we're adding in a 1 here, but remember on the other side we need to do 4 times 1, so we're adding in a 4. Okay, then we factor it, so we have 4 parentheses. This will just be x plus 1 squared equals 1. Divide both sides by 4. X plus 1 squared equals 1/4. Okay, now when you take the square root, okay, we're going to be taking the square root of a fraction, so x plus 1 equals, now when you take the square root of a fraction, you can square root each numbers, the numerator and the denominator. So the square root of 1 is just 1. Now we're going to go ahead and put our plus or minus. The square root of 1 is 1, so on top I'll have 1, and in the denominator the square root of 4 is 2. And then we'll go ahead and subtract 1 from both sides. So our solution will be, well, we're not done yet, so it'll be x equals negative 1 plus or minus a 1/2. Now, since these are numbers and we don't have any square roots, let's go ahead and simplify that. So we're going to have 2 solutions. In the first solution, we'll do the plus. So negative 1 plus 1/2 is a negative 1/2. Okay, then we'll also do the minus. So then we'll do negative 1 minus 1/2, which is negative 1.5. So those are our 2 solutions. Okay, this next one is a you try example, so go ahead and pause the video, go ahead and try it on your own. Now notice it's not in standard form, so you would have to get it in standard form before you start. Okay, check your work, see how you did. This was a challenge, so hopefully you did well. If you just made a couple of mistakes, then that's okay, we can fix it. You'll get some more practice in class, but make sure you write down any questions that you have so I can address them in class.